This is an exploration of the psychological and philosophical implications of Fallout New Vegas and the Republic and their surrounding discourses. This was inspired by a class project where I had to compare the two and come up with my own conclusions about the nature of utopian texts, and I say inspired because this is going to be an entirely new essay with a different method and a completely rewritten script. Before entering this journey, I would suggest you have a basic understanding of Fallout New Vegas because I'm not going to bog down the entire video's pacing to explain this 30-hour game to you, and all the events will be grouped in topics and not in order in which they happen, so watch one of these videos before watching this one. Or you could just go experience this amazing game for yourself, but remember to come back. If you haven't done any of those things and are still watching this video, then good job, you passed the real test. Have fun. Now, you may be wondering why I'm talking about a video game from 2010 about robot cowboys and Roman cosplayers and conflating it with a book from 375 BCE about the complex inner workings of the human soul and how to make a fascist society. Well, okay, the latter kind of makes sense. The reason is that I believe approaching this game with a philosophical understanding of the original utopian texts, yes, before Roger Moore? Yes, before Thomas More coined the term, will allow me to gain a deeper understanding of what the core of these texts are and what truths we can draw from them. It also allows me to view the discourse and responses surrounding New Vegas in a completely new light. Okay, that sounded a little pretentious. The real reason is that I can criticize Plato while using one of the greatest RPGs of all time. So let's start at the beginning. Of the Republic, that is. Plato, or Socrates, the protagonist, although I will be referring to him as Plato throughout since he is merely a mouthpiece, begins with a conversation about what life is worth living and how and why one should live justly. He comes to the conclusion that the individual man is just in the same way that the state is just, when the three elements within it each minded their own business. So living justly means minding your own business? Well, no, it's more than that. He says three elements within, which he explores by looking at the micro level, and then using the macro level to elaborate. This is, I believe, a common misconception when looking at the Republic as a utopian text, and I fell for it as well. It's not just about a city. Bear with me. Even though it is titled the Republic, the city is just a macrocosm for the human mind and soul. He uses language describing a city to easily relate it to the individual. The same is said that the soul is a microcosm of the state, and I have much more criticisms about the city, but for now let's just look at it as an exploration of the soul, starting with the first element, the producers, or the appetite. This represents our basic desires, our needs if you will. This includes hunger, comfort, lust, etc. How does this relate to Fallout New Vegas, you're wondering? Well, if you think about it, video games are really something that fulfills our desires to some extent. We play video games to scratch a certain itch, and Fallout New Vegas certainly fulfills this. It provides a freedom of expression, a freedom of choice and action. You can do anything your heart desires. Although New Vegas also proposes the possibility of losing control of these desires, committing horrible and unjust things without consequence, which coincidentally is represented by the Ring of Gyges, brought up by Glaucon, the yes man of this section. The Ring of Gyges is a hypothetical about a real Greek king who comes into possession of a gold ring that makes the wearer invisible, so basically the Ring of Power from the Lord of the Rings. Glaucon proposes that anyone in possession of such a power would be incapable of using it justly. There is no one, it would commonly be supposed, who would have such iron strength of will as to stick to what is right and keep his hands from taking other people's property. Not only have we seen this with the stealth boys that are used to the point of irrevocable damage by the Nightkin, but the entire game is designed to give you the freedom to do as you please. Greed and hunger for power are significant parts of human nature, and as we've seen in New Vegas, this led to the destruction of human civilization as we knew it.
Caesar thinks he can change human nature. Most of the Legion is following Caesar, not Caesar's ideals. When he's gone, it'll crumble. Might not happen overnight. Might take a few decades, but it'll happen. Basic human nature. Greed, ambition, jealousy. We'll see to it.
The main motto of the Fallout franchise has always been,
War. War never changes.
Human nature will never change, and it will always lead to the destruction of civilization if we allow it to. Which leads us to the second element, and the rebuttal of the Ring of Gyges. The auxiliaries, or the spirit. The spirit is our courage, our empathy, and discipline. Okay, this might be a stretch, but I believe the way Fallout does this is with how the world is designed. You see, the game is specifically made to deter the player from exploring the entire map from the start, because enemies don't scale to your level or equipment.
Have you ever seen a Deathclaw? They're taller than a man and far, far stronger and faster. You'd have to be the meanest, toughest, roughest bastard in the wasteland to have any chance against them, and I don't think that's you. You'd need to take out the pack leaders, the Mother Deathclaw and the Deathclaw Alpha male.
Also, the quests have certain barriers for speech options according to how much you've leveled up your stats. So even though there is freedom, it is still controlled to some extent, which is how Plato envisions his state. It can be circumvented with courage, however. The third element is Guardians, or Reason. The rulers, the part that controls everything. Reason is what guides the story and dialogue. It is how you interact with everyone in Fallout. It allows you to get past most obstacles and also informs how the game ends. For example, the final encounter with the Legion, if you don't side with them, allows you to use Reason to make them retreat.
The East was a hard-fought campaign. Even now, Caesar drew too much of the Legion's blood needed there for this. Hoover Dam is but a place. I will not have it be the gravestone of the Legion, whether quickly, or as you describe, slowly, by attrition.
Small tangent, one criticism I have of New Vegas is that they show which dialogue options align with the skill. This is a problem, I think, because it immediately tells you which choice will progress the conversation without letting you figure it out. They sometimes add challenge by having multiple skill options that you have to choose from, but I think this just adds artifice that damages the immersion. Anyway, Fallout New Vegas uses the video game medium to bring the Republic into a new point of view and applies the thought experiment to a real audience. However, we've been looking at the structure of the composition. Why do we now look at the substance? Which brings us to the second book of the Republic. Moving on to the analysis of the macrocosm, education is an integral part of how the state and classes are formed. The education system is designed to train the mind and body to a degree in which people are categorized into the elements I listed previously, although it is heavily censored and restricted to ensure a level of obedience and remove the possibility of cynicism. He creates a noble lie to tell the citizens in order to maintain the definition of justice he formed initially. When God fashioned you, he added gold in the composition of those of you who are qualified to be rulers. He put silver in the auxiliaries and iron and bronze in the farmers and other workers. He suggests eugenics to instill a sense of fate which keeps the citizens from trying to change classes. Does this sound familiar? Probably not. Well, the person that shoots you at the beginning of New Vegas and becomes the main antagonist for half the game says to you,
"The game was rigged from the start."
Achieving the same purpose as that noble lie. It achieves that purpose because the main quest for each player doesn't change. The game makes you follow the path to kill that guy, which is specifically structured to educate the player at each location leading up to the strip, with each place informing them more about the world and the conflict which is taking place. At the same time allowing the player to experience the combat, and introducing weapons and enemies along the way. However, this is where New Vegas subtly flips the script, as the design is employing all three elements in tandem to entice the player into doing what they want. Leaning into the player's desire to take revenge on Benny, designing the world to discipline the player into sticking to the path, and using reason to teach the player how the world works, all leading into each other to form a cohesive experience. Is this not going against Plato's definition of justice? Moreover, the game never confines the player to learning limited information or a restricted path. You can go anywhere whenever you want to. Killing Benny is just the graduation ceremony for the completion of your education, but what do you do after that? What have you learnt and how do we apply it to the rest of Fallout? The philosopher ruler is an idea created by Plato due to egoism and superiority complex. Sorry, that's not what I meant to say. The philosopher ruler is just as literal as it implies. A leader that happens to be a philosopher. The interesting part is how one becomes a philosopher ruler. It's described as a divided line that progresses to the ultimate truth, or as it's better known for, the cave analogy. Essentially, he creates a hypothetical about prisoners who have been confined in a dark cave since birth, the only light source being a small fire behind them. There are also puppet masters that hold up representations of people and objects that create shadows on the wall of the cave. These representations become the prisoner's only knowledge of the outside world, consequently making them believe in that false reality only. One of the prisoners is released and exits the cave, realizing that there is an entire world outside of it. The light of the sun blinds them at first, forcing them to only look at the shadows or reflections. Then they're able to withstand the truth of their reality. This is an extremely popular metaphor that has lasted centuries, being iterated upon for millennia in hundreds of stories and philosophical texts. Fallout has had a very literal interpretation throughout the series in the form of vaults. literal underground bunkers that were originally meant as social experiments, in the guise of protection, run by the insidious corporation Vault-Tec. The best example of this is in the beginning of Fallout 3. New Vegas is the most interesting to look at, however, because it takes a more figurative and extended approach. The shadows on the wall that projects to the false reality is the aesthetic itself, a post-apocalyptic 50s America. I believe it can be summed up by the first 30 seconds of the first cinematic in the game. The first shot presents us with the representation of Las Vegas before the war, a photo of the Lucky 38, framed. The camera pans outward to the surrounding wall and the desolate land stretching across the landscape, with Frank Sinatra playing in the background. Despite being set in the distant future, the war has frozen society in time and place. The deliberate choice to show the strip first and foremost, a distillation of American capitalism and ideals, is quite a powerful way to set up the ideas of the game. Even Benny is specifically designed and written to be a remnant of that past.
But I ain't a fink. Dig?
Jean Baudrillard describes in his work Simulacrum Simulation a desert of the real, a place in which models have replaced the reality, a hyperreal. Like a good video essayist, I actually read the whole thing, and it has a lot of interesting parallels and takes on the Republic which relates it to our modern society. The proper terms Plato uses for the journey of the philosopher ruler are the visible and the intelligible realm. This is important because Jean Baudrillard uses these terms as well. In a section where he talks about iconoclasts and the implications for the creation of icons in the place of reality, the visible machinery of icons substituted for the pure and intelligible idea of God, one can say that the icon worshippers were the most modern minds, the most adventurous, because in the guise of having God become apparent in the mirror of images, they were already enacting his death and his disappearance in the epiphany of his representations. This stood out to me because the second commandment in the Torah dictates, "You shall have no other gods beside me. You shall not make for yourself any graven image, nor any manner of likeness, of anything that is heaven above. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." This is interesting as it implies a separation between subject and object, visible and intelligible. God is jealous of an image of himself because that image is not them, and worshipping it would mean worshipping a false idol. If we take this further, we can infer that any image of anything or anyone would therefore be an entirely different realm to the original. For example, let's say me, in this video, the person you are watching, is not me, it's an image of me. Therefore, anything I say cannot be directly attributed to me, but to this video. That is a very slippery slope of discourse that I won't get into right now, but the point is that this version of me is a simulation of my thoughts and opinions. Bringing this back to video games, I believe this is why we feel no remorse when we commit murder on a mass scale. The representation of people on a screen, no matter how real they can look, will never be in the intelligible realm. VR might be the closest we can get to real, but it is still a simulation, merely a facsimile of reality, where there is still a layer of separation, until we get to the technology of the Matrix period, that is. Anyway, that was a long journey, but I think we got there. The point that we can relate to New Vegas is that in a desert of the real, a landscape of images, how can we draw conclusions about the political and moral landscape? Well, Baudrillard suggests an absence of reality within simulation in which sci-fi and utopian fiction are created to resolve. The tendency is certainly toward the reabsorption of this distance, of this gap that leaves room for an ideal or critical projection. This projection is maximized in the utopian, in which a transcendent sphere, a radically different universe takes form. In the context of the Republic, I believe the death of Socrates in 399 BCE is what created this need that Plato had to fulfill. In Fallout New Vegas, we see this everywhere, in every faction. But instead of creating a new philosophical school of thought, they use icons of the past as models of society. But these icons of the past do not represent the intelligible reality of those periods, but an idealized version of it. They even created a diagnosis for it.
There is an expression in the wasteland, old world blues.
It refers to those so obsessed with the past they can't see the present, much less the future, for what it is.
They stare into the what was, eyes like pilot lights, guttering and spent, as the realities of their world continue on around them.
But if that is the proverbial cave, how does one find the truth? There is one aspect of the game that I have failed to mention. You can kill any NPC. Before you kill Benny, he tells you his plan to take control of New Vegas for himself. You get your very own Yes Man, which allows you to push back the other factions and not become a dictator yourself, but give power to the people. By giving power to the present rather than the past, it is the logical conclusion to the thesis of Fallout New Vegas. Although this raises a conflict with the Republic, and we'll explore that now. If Plato uses his system of government as an ideal state and New Vegas uses anarchy, what are their competitors? In this book, Plato breaks down the societies that he believes are imperfect. The first he describes as oligarchy, a society where it is wealth that counts, I said, and in which political power is in the hands of the rich and the poor have no share of it. Coincidentally, this is what the first faction you encounter in New Vegas is, the Strip, controlled by Mr. House. The district is run by 3 rich families that all own casinos. Just outside the gates are people that are starving and sick. In fact, they are purposely locked out of the Strip, and any attempt of getting in is met with excessive force. The interesting part is that Mr. House says something that parallels Plato's ideas.
If you want to see the fate of democracies, look out the windows.
Before I use Baudrillard's extrapolation of utopian and sci-fi literature coming into existence by a gap of reality, this gap being realized in the death of Socrates and the wasteland of the Nevada. The link between the wasteland and the death of Socrates is closer than we originally thought. Both were caused by democracy, in the perspective of both respective creators. Speaking of democracy, we should probably look at what it is defined as by Plato. It's an agreeable anarchic form of society with plenty of variety, which treats all men as equal, whether they are equal or not. This is similar to the NCR, the supposed democratic relic of the USA. This is in fact a misdirection. The NCR are actually quite autocratic. They convince other settlements to assimilate into their territory, or they send mercenaries to terrorize them into complying. The wealthier class holds most of the power and sends the poorer into the military to carry out suicide missions. All people are said to be equal by how the NCR presents themselves, but in reality they are not. And then there's the fact that there was a powerful leader in control for 52 years, as Caesar points out.
As a young man, I was taught to venerate President Tandy of Shady Sands, the founding mother of the new California Republic. Did you know her presidency lasted 52 years? And that her father, Aradesh, was the Republic's first president? Does that sound like a democracy to you? Or a hereditary dictatorship?
In relation to this, Plato happens to say, "What is the nature of tyranny? It's obvious, I suppose, that it arises out of democracy." And with that, let's move on to tyranny. The obvious comparison would be, of course, Caesar's legion. But one thing that you didn't expect is that the legion is an analog for the Republic. Caesar is a self-proclaimed philosopher ruler.
And the teaching stuck. I was taught it was my responsibility to bring the torch of knowledge to the waste. I may have taken the torch part more literally than they intended.
He references Hegelian dialectics, and I haven't studied up on Hegel's writing, but it seems like he hasn't either.
It's Hegelian dialectics, not personal animosity. How do I put this basically enough? It's a philosophical theory, the kind you might encounter if you took time to read some books.
Jack Saint made a video going into more detail about why he doesn't know Hegelian dialectics, so please watch that. He even speaks to you in a way that is not dissimilar to the Socratic method. This is something that I should have mentioned earlier but forgot. Every faction that you speak to speaks down to you in the same way that Socrates does in the Republic to his pupils. You may have heard me use the term yes man a few times, and that's because that's what I call his pupils, as all they do is tell Socrates how great he is for his intellect. Tyranny does arise from democracy, both in life and death. In life, we have seen it multiple times, in the past and the present. In death, we see it here. The Republic was created in the death of Socrates, the Legion was created in the death of America. They both refuse that they are tyranny, just like when presidential candidates say that they are operating within democracy. But the philosopher ruler is just dictatorship with extra steps. Plato tries to justify it by saying that the philosopher ruler should not want to be a ruler, but what he fails to realize is that in the receival of power would come some form of corruption of the ego. The myth of medals would create some sense of entitlement in the person put in such high regard.
I've got this under control, baby. No one else can do what I do here.
Thus creating a self-obsessed dictator. Fallout New Vegas challenges these utopian ideas and exposes them for the paradox that they are. You might say, well, what about the independent ending? Isn't that a utopian ideal as well? Well, not quite. New Vegas understands and acknowledges that it is not a perfect solution, but it's a start.
After the Courier ensured New Vegas remained free, the followers found that independent Vegas was even more unstable and violent than before. Old Mormon Fort became excessively burdened by the influx of patients, struggling to provide even the most basic of services.
Leaving the cave is just one step on the journey of discovering the truth. One valid criticism against Fallout New Vegas that was brought up by Sophie from Mars is that it lacks some kind of punishment or negative incentive for aligning with Caesar's Legion.
It's a far cry from letting you choose to be a fascist neo-Roman cosplayer and see if you choose to be the fascist, then it's bad because... Wait, did we forget to put any consequences in for being a fascist? Oh god, oh fuck, is our game actually about anything?
Even though I don't oppose another method of identifying Nazis, I do think this is a shortcoming on the developer's part. Although there is an argument to be had about whether it is a necessary shortcoming. Would the game have been as successful or long-lasting if it had overtly opposed Caesar's Legion? In my opinion, yes. The previous Fallout games have always created some antagonistic faction, like the Super Mutants in Fallout 1 and the Enclave in Fallout 2. Part of the appeal of Fallout New Vegas is that you can side with any faction, and this doesn't have to change. Perhaps the only thing that they would have to alter is making the quest to join the Legion a lot more morally reprehensible. Also, if I were to raise another criticism, I believe New Vegas represents anarchism in a misinformed way. Anarchism is not when government doesn't exist and people are left to their own devices. Anarchism is when people work together to create a harmonious society without a hierarchy of power or authority. Popular culture is to blame for this, but Fallout is a part of popular culture, so that doesn't help. A game that is a lot more overt about its political messaging, and is also just a better game in general, is Disco Elysium.
Okay, so maybe he's not exactly a communist, but there's definitely some communistic residue about him.
Even though it received several awards and praise from audiences and critics alike, it has not reached the same level of success or popularity as something like Fallout New Vegas, as it is such a unique and esoteric experience. I am one of those people who enjoys games with engaging gameplay mechanics and doesn't tend to enjoy games with tons of narrative exposition and dialogue. However, I decided to give Disco Elysium a try, coincidentally because of Sophie's video on it, and it grabbed me immediately. It is one of my favorite games now, but I imagine that experience is not the same for a lot of people, and because of that, its discussions have been limited, as the people who enjoy political discourse and philosophical exploration are the same people who would play this game. That's not me being elitist, that's simply my observation. If Fallout New Vegas was more politically overt, I don't think it would affect the size of its audience. It has been able to do what it does because it has the advantage of being part of a widely known and regarded franchise, as well as having satisfying gameplay. It has managed to trick gamers into sparking philosophical and political debate in a fascinating way, and isn't that the whole point of art itself? To elicit a reaction in the greater cultural context? Just as the Republic has done for its time and beyond for philosophical discourse. By using the video game medium, these complex ideas have reached a new generation of people and thinkers. And they have found new relevancy, as I'm sure in 1,000 years they will be again adapted into a new medium and genre. Speaking of art, I think we should look at how Plato talks about representation and the role of art and poetry in society. He starts by explaining how an object is formed. The first exists in nature, and we would say, I suppose, that it was made by God. The second is the carpenter, and the third by the painter. These three distinct versions of the same object represent the procession of the intelligible and visible realm. He talks a lot in threes. I reckon we should explore this in the world of simulacra and simulation. Again, sorry. Baudrillard explains how art changes with time. Such would be the successive phases of the image. It is the reflection of a profound reality. It masks and denatures a profound reality. It masks the absence of a profound reality. It has no relation to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulacrum. It's not 3 steps, but it essentially has the same endpoints. As an artwork is removed from its original context and time, it eventually becomes a simulation of that time and context. We see this in the Republic, as it is a reflection of Plato's time and culture through the thoughts and criticisms of it. I believe Fallout is at the second stage currently. The game is a caricature of the context surrounding it. The setting is an intentional twist on the post-apocalyptic genre in a way that represents the problems of current American culture. In a sense, it is actually more representative of now because of the political discourse rising on the wasteland of opinion, Twitter. You know those weird people that say we live in a simulation or whatever? Well, according to Baudrillard, we don't live in a simulation, we live in a world of simulation. Everything around us is a simulation of something. Reproductions of a thing as opposed to productions of new things. Perhaps art, ironically, is the only thing that allows us to see the intelligible realm. to understand what is around us, and how to separate truth from deception. This is not what Plato thinks, however. He believes art eludes us, it masks us from the reality, and appeals to the inferior parts of the mind. Well, as we have observed through New Vegas, if a piece of art can contend with a high work such as the Republic, then surely it is not inferior as Plato suggests. But what is art? I've been talking about it for so long I might as well explain it. What have I gotten myself into? If I were to use Plato's dictionary, it would be extremely limiting and narrow. Obviously, there are many schools of thought involved in such a debate. Plato believes that art is far removed from truth, but an interesting quote I found by Pablo Picasso in 1972 states, "We all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize truth." This is quite contradictory to Plato's idea. It is in deception that art reveals truth. I largely agree with this. Using the knowledge I have accumulated and have displayed here, it would be a logical extrapolation. A sociological understanding would have you believe that art is another form of communication. Again, I can't disagree. Throughout history, even in the caves, art was used to transfer information from one source to another. Whatever was witnessed was then painted and preserved. Art can be used for more than just imitating reality, however. It can be used to express something that can't be merely understood in words, again using lies to reveal a deeper truth than words could ever seek to explain. Another interpretation is that art preserves what is temporary, freezing a time and place, an entire culture even, in order to keep it alive. As French art critic André Moreau puts it, art is a revolt, a protest against extinction. It is also quite concurrent with the procession of simulacrum. Even if it replaces the original intelligible object, it still has power to exist in the realm of thought. This is what Fallout New Vegas seeks to reveal, and despite how Plato seems to refuse it, the Republic is made to preserve the teachings of Socrates in the wake of his execution. Using this definition of art that I have synthesized, the Republic is in itself a work of art. It uses a false city to prove what is otherwise unknown about the reality of the human mind and soul, to communicate what can otherwise not be explained, and it was created to protest the ending of Socrates' life, and the extinction of philosophical thinking. It is often said that art contains a fragment of the soul of whoever created it, and if art is created to be preserved, then does that mean that one's soul is also preserved with it? Conveniently, Plato has an entire chapter talking about the immortality of the soul. Who would have thought that I wrote this to make sense? I sure didn't. The final book of the Republic is about what the soul is and what are its properties. He claims that a soul can neither be created nor destroyed. It merely transforms from one state to another. What I just described is the law of conservation of mass, but that's really what Plato explains it as. He says that if there's no evil that can destroy it, either its own or another's, it must exist forever. That is to say, it must be immortal. It follows that the same souls have always existed. Their number cannot be decreased because no soul can die, nor can it increase. Any increase in the immortal must be at the expense of mortality. So then what happens to the soul once somebody dies? Well, they acquire the rewards or punishments befitting of their actions while alive. Essentially, he says that the intrinsic value of living justly is the honor and good name one receives in death. In any action, in dealings with others or in life itself, isn't he the man who in the end gets both the rewards and the good name among his fellows? This is the answer to the second question Plato raised in the beginning. Why should one live justly? The entire book is about justice. It's funny that I only spent one paragraph talking about it. The rest of these paragraphs have been tangential in relation, but I think justice is merely the vessel in which we explore how the mind and soul works. It is the catalytic events which set off a chain reaction that led us to this point. I don't believe the soul is inherently immortal, but the creation of works such as these are what makes one's soul immortal. It's in the memory and in art which the soul exists. I am, in a way, perpetuating Plato's soul in the making of this video, while at the same time making my own immortal. But we must also understand that the soul changes all the time. Given the way I am talking about Plato, I am also transforming a part of his legacy. I am probably exaggerating how important this video is. Now, what if the body was immortal? This is where Fallout comes in. The super mutants, ghouls, and robots are an integral part of Fallout's universe. Super mutants are an evolved species from humans that are immune from the radiation of the wasteland. The ghouls are people that survived the nuclear holocaust and as a result are immortal, and robots are robots. I believe we can apply the philosophy of transhumanism, the idea of becoming beyond human to the point where humanity itself has changed meaning. The ghouls are a good point to start. These are immortal beings stuck in a rotting body, and yet they find ways to live amongst humans. even helping them. In multiple cases, they are characterized as people who just live many lives in succession, some of them changing their name and their occupation every century or so.
Thank you. Change names and jobs every decade or so just to keep things interesting.
And some have more ambitious goals. Perhaps because they have knowledge of reality before the war, they aren't susceptible to the false reality, but they are doomed to not experience the rewards that come with death, unless you kill them. So is there really any value for them living justly? The super mutants are a different case entirely. They were specifically born by an artificially created virus, and not by incidental exposure to the nuclear radiation. When looking at the series as a whole, it seems that they have gone through kind of an arc from Fallout 1 to New Vegas, ignoring Fallout 3 because they were just gun range targets in that. In the first game, they had the goal of creating peace, given their superior intellect and physical attributes, by eliminating humans.
The Unity will bring about the master race.
Master!
One able to survive, or even
Thrive.
in the wasteland. As long as there are differences, we will tear ourselves apart fighting each other. We need one race.
Race!
One goal.
Goal!
One people to move forward to our destiny.
Although, realizing their sterility, it would have been impossible to maintain, fitting with the immortal not being able to increase in number. Again, we see the through line of Fallout, exposing utopian ideals and dismantling them with reason. After the destruction of the Master, they started to fracture, and some realized that they can coexist with humans, while others stuck with the belief they could someday supersede humans. So they are susceptible to utopian beliefs, which makes them closer to humans than ghouls. I found a comment by a random guy named Harold G. Newman on a blog about transhumanism. Random thoughts. Conquering human mortality seems about as likely as either proving or disproving that time and space are the same. Life, death, and meaning are merely parts of the total human experience. Meaning itself changes with the advance of human consciousness. Science and technology will not, in and of themselves, promote human flourishing until it is fully realized that they have the potential to do just the opposite. Living forever would not render life meaningless. It would only serve to further the problem of finite resources. There will be a link to the original article if you want to look at it. Actually, this guy seems to post comments on a few blogs from philosophytalk.org. I don't know who he is, but he raises a good point. If life and death are fundamental parts of the current human experience, what would be the replacements if they were to be removed? If we are in control of our souls and life, when we die, our souls enter the hands of the living, but what if that wasn't the case? Robots are an interesting part of Fallout because they are, in and of themselves, simulations of life and thought. Mr. House, for example, is a simulation of a pre-war businessman of the same name, but his body is actually being kept alive through the machinery of the computer. Perhaps a literal manifestation of the soul being kept alive through memory. The founder of transhumanism, Julian Huxley, describes the goal of science and technology to further evolve the human mind and body to achieve its full potential as a species. But I believe this has already been achieved. The creation of art and simulation is an attempt to exceed the limits of human capability. The mortal has become immortal, and both the Republic and Fallout New Vegas have realized this. Art transcends the realm of human experience and thought because no one individual can understand every interpretation of one artwork. But it also brings awareness to the experiences and souls of so many other individuals. Humanity's potential has already been realized. We just haven't adjusted our eyes yet. Well, the preface I wrote might have been a small understatement of what I have explored in these 35 minutes. You could probably tell because I recorded this months after the other live-action segments. We started with talking about utopian texts, and it has led us to the entirety of literature itself. Now, we've seen that there is a lot of truths that we can draw from these two texts with the help of many philosophical and sociological understandings, and I never claimed that I am an expert on these topics, although I did imply it, so I can't draw any scholarly valid generalizations. I can merely get you to think more about these texts and really just the whole basis of Plato's ideology to begin with. That's more than I could hope for. I believe these two texts, and really art itself, is made in an attempt to expand what the human mind and soul could do. Technology didn't help us get there, it is merely an external hard drive holding what we don't have space for in our skulls. Meaningful artworks get us to see the world in a completely different lens, and the Republic and Fallout New Vegas and their respective creators will forever be a part of our cultural landscape and will spark more discussions to come. I'm not even sure if anything I've said could be considered a revelation, but at least it was to me, and hopefully the person watching this video could glean some value from this video. Now, this might have been a little too ambitious for my first video essay, but I'm glad that it has brought me, and hopefully you now as well, on this journey. The philosopher ruler's journey. What I'm suggesting is that I should be ruling over. I really want to thank my older sibling and my friends for helping me actually finish this video. My older sibling read through all of my previous scripts and gave me tons of helpful feedback, and that's how I got to the final product, which is what you're watching right now. If my teacher is watching this right now, which I hope that she is, but I'd just like to say that I'm really grateful to her for doing a really good job of teaching me the English extension course, and I really think I gained a lot of insight, and also for giving me a good mark for the original project that I submitted this for. This has been a long time in the making. It's been a year and a half, I think, almost 2 years since I made the original 10-minute version, and I'm really happy with how this has turned out. And if you think that I got something wrong or could have done something differently, please let me know in the comments, because I really like to improve. I think my essays that I've done after this, or as you see on my page before this, I think some of them are a bit better in some respects. I still think this is a worthwhile endeavor, and it has definitely gotten me to improve generally as a critical thinker. So please subscribe for more of this. I can't promise that it will be the same style or the same amount of research, but I'll try my best. You know, I can't really do this every single time, you know, but yeah, since my last video, I have finally finished school, so I don't have to worry about that anymore, which means that I'll be able to spend a lot more time on doing this bullshit. No, it's fun. I really do enjoy doing this, and yeah, Alright, bye.
You let the blues move in, now I'm moving out.